Hello, hello. Today I'll be talking to artist Yaz Krehbiel. He should be getting in soon. I see his name. Um, I hope you are all hearing me. Um, I see that you joined, Yaz. View, request. Yeah. Okay, here we go. Please let me know if you can hear us, see us, and we'll go from there. Yaz, waiting to connect. One more second, he should be up here sharing. Hello, Yaz.
Hi,
It's so nice to see you again.
good to
Wait,
see you. You look beautiful today. You looked good
thank
last
you.
week too, but
Yesterday when we tested it out, I was like, no makeup, pajamas on. So this is my live version. It's much better.
and I put a cheesecloth on everything because my cracked screen makes a nice soft focus for all my selfies. So
So thank you so much for agreeing. I know it's an adventure to do your first live, and I feel lucky that you're doing it with me.
I feel so lucky, and just thank you so much for uh, for wanting to do it. And it's a real honor for me to talk to you. I had
So
a great time just talking last night, and I had to resuscitate my sort of dormant Instagram account for this, so
uh-huh.
that was kind of fun. But
It's an interesting way. Like I've been doing lives frequently, and I think there's something weirdly magical about them. To imagine that maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation if it weren't for
yeah,
if
yeah.
it wasn't for the quarantine. So
We
look
haven't
at
usually
that. Take
taken
us
the
here.
time
Take
to
us
sit
here.
down and talk for this long about something like that. So there's also kind of a weird intimacy, right? It's like, it's just, I mean, most of the live streams are one person. So it's sort of like you're just sitting on the edge of their sofa or something, which is nice. But
Yeah. So I'm going to start by introducing you briefly, and then we'll kind of develop on that maybe towards the middle of our conversation. And please interrupt me or add something that you think is important, or if I miss
okay.
anything. But Yaz is a Chicago-born, California-based artist. I'm very jealous of the most amazing place where he lives, the Marin County. And that's what he's been painting mostly when not around, when traveling around. But so he does mostly landscape painting. And his background, so he studied at Dartmouth in the same course as my husband, Thomas. We'll talk about that later. And then he briefly studied at the Art Institute of Chicago, and then went to the California College of Arts and Crafts, CCA. Is that how you call it?
Well, it used to be CCAC, now it's CCA, but
And then you did your MFA at Indiana University,
yeah.
and then spent 3 summers starting in 97 in Umbria in Italy, also studying painting, right?
Yeah, so I actually did the Italy before my MFA, and then they kind of overlapped. And that's Italy. That Umbria program is where I really started to paint landscape. So that was 23 years ago.
Amazing. Why don't
Great.
you tell me about that? Like, I like that moment, or maybe how do you see this moment when you notice that it was about the landscape? And before
So,
you start,
uh,
I'm just going to show one painting for people to.
okay. And I have a bunch of paintings. Okay, there we go. That's a cloud painting. I did that painting last week.
I only have the cloud paintings here with me.
So that one's sitting right back there. We can go look at some of the,
Okay.
so I'm sitting in a room where there's a lot of my paintings, and then I brought some extra ones in that we can look at if you'd like. So like we talked about yesterday, I happened to, the first summer I took painting was at Art Institute. I went to summer school there, and the two classes were beginning studio painting and landscape painting. And that, so I took both of them. So I did basically learn to paint outside the summer I first learned to paint. So I kind of got comfortable with that. It's actually, for some people, going from a studio practice to outside painting is really hard because everything has to be very streamlined. And it's like, if you're used to that quiet and comfort of a studio, outside can be a bummer, especially if like you're in Grant Park in Chicago. But I didn't know any better because I'd never painted. So that just happened together. But then you know, like painting outside, observational, like sort of impressionist style landscape painting in the 90s in art school was about the lamest thing you could possibly do. So unfortunately, I didn't really have the fortitude at that time. So then I'm like,
Explain why it was seen as like a thing you shouldn't do, just for people who
oh,
maybe
I don't
don't
know.
know
I mean,
about that.
it's kind of hard to remember what art school was actually like, but you know, it was just kind of reactionary, and it wasn't at all of the moment. I think there, in some ways, some kinds of painting, like perceptual painting, has gained a little more traction. I mean, perceptual painting is just always there. It's never going anywhere. It's kind of like an eddy current in the big river of the art world. It's just this little thing to the side that's sort of, it's like a little universe of people that are drawn to it for one reason or the other. So, but I'd gotten away from that when I was at CCAC and was, you know, you're just trying all this stuff. And then I had been in school just so long between college, and then I went to engineering school for a year, and then two art schools. So I went to work in Silicon Valley for a while, and the only thing I like to tell about that was that I cried my first day. I went in the bathroom at the orientation and cried in a stall, which I don't know why I kept going. I should have just left right there, but I didn't. And but after that, I decided I wanted to be a painter, and I was actually working with a couple Italian women, and I found this program in a magazine, and this woman I knew was like, "You have to go to Umbria." And turned out I didn't know anything about the program. One of the teachers that I studied with at Art Institute taught there, this guy Dan Gustin, who was a really good teacher and a very prolific painter. So I was like, well, if Dan's there, that must be legit. And I went, and you know, I was making these like hermetic, abstract, narrative little figure paintings. They're just like 8 inches wide that were kind of just so painful. And then I got there, and you're on this like overlooking the Tiber Valley, and it's just the most amazing thing ever. And I'd sort of always had, I think my mom had kind of like inculcated an Italian fetish in our family in like the
She's
1970s.
watching us. Did you see? Hello from
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah. So my mom was into Italy, and just like, you know, my mom just loved style. And so we had been to Italy. I just had this like dream that I wanted to learn Italian. And then I went to this program, and I started painting landscape. And it was just, I never turned back from there. That like, that experience was, I realized that my subject matter was not within me. It was outside of me. And that the way that I sort of found my way to myself was through this, like, you know, really prolonged observation of the outside world. And Italy is just a very, you know, the classical landscape is incredibly inspiring in it. And I think it sort of hit all these other things in my psyche. So there's a bunch of Italian paintings behind us, but
I would love to see them later. But I loved what you told me yesterday, that the landscape is something that you look at and it seems like it's always there, but in fact, it's always changing.
right. So you know, and I think the premise of this was, I actually just was looking at at your site, and I saw that you put this Constable image up that my wife then was like, oh, that's, you know, Constable's cloud paintings are Yaz's favorite thing, and you should interview him. So of course, it was her idea, like everything. Yeah. So after Italy, you know, I moved back to California after grad school, and I've painted here for a really long time. And Marin County is an incredible, I mean, it's a really incredible, just like ecosystem, because there's just like 5 completely different ecosystems, and there's all these different kinds of landscape. But, you know, the weather can be really consistent, which is lovely, right? It's like what we love about it. But in some ways, like, it can be a little unchanging. And like we were talking about yesterday, I sometimes think the sort of sameness of the landscape day in and day out gives you an opportunity for certain things. Like my not so ever all the paintings that are around us right now are small paintings, but like right up above where I'm sitting is that's like a 4-foot painting of San Francisco. And
Uh-huh.
so that's kind of like my non like cloud work with these like really accretive things. And one of the things I was saying yesterday is that I think that that quality of California can sort of play into my worst tendencies as a painter, which is like things can get a little static. And through Constable and his clouds studies and his skies in his main paintings, I kind of got interested in this other element. And actually the way Constable and I came to cloud painting are similar in
Uh-huh.
that, after my first big show, which were these Marin landscapes in San Francisco, like for me, it was like my first, real one-person gallery show. Um, this guy that was like a total not art person was like, "Oh, you don't really do the sky, right?" Um, and I was just like, "What do you mean?" Like, of course I do the sky. Like there's just not a lot of clouds around here, and it just sort of was like a burr. It was like, it just kind of irritated me. And there's a story of Constable showing his landscapes at the Academy show and being criticized for, I don't know, the like lifelessness of his sky. And in a letter that he wrote to his best friend, he like committed himself to conquering all the difficulties. And he thought like the sky was actually the most difficult thing um, in painting, in observational painting. And so basically in the couple years right after that show, we had two very, very rainy, stormy winters in Northern California. And I kind of
Explain
got
that that
into,
happens between October and April, right? It's
yeah,
like
so
your rainy
we
season.
only really have clouds. We have fog in the summer, but we only really have real clouds from like October till the end of April or maybe into May. And that's when we get like the rainy season and we get storms. And so we just happened to have a couple years where it was like you could almost cloud paint every day. And what I found was, one, you have to kind of paint small and really fast. So you can't think, it's like, it's very athletic. It's like you don't think too much about it. You just kind of have to go because everything's moving and everything's changing. And so I really thought that was like really exciting for me to just have that kind of urgency. It just lends everything this crazy urgency. And so you just really get into it. And I found that I really liked making one-off paintings because the whole painting is sort of open at the same time. I was saying yesterday that like my longer paintings are very accretive, where they're kind of just built up like layer after layer, like not layers where one layer relies on the layer below, but more just like trial and error and just repeated refinement and attempts. And this is sort of, I think of like the cloud paintings as more like my regular paintings have like a depth to them, and the cloud paintings are almost like a field where the whole painting is kind of activated simultaneously and you're sort of moving things around on a field. Um, so I really worked those first couple of years like trying to master that. And as I was saying yesterday, when I look at the very first ones, it's like they're really rudimentary. It's like a white puff, or
Mm-hmm.
they're just like blue sky and white puff. And then, like anything with lots of study, you just go deeper and what you see goes deeper. And then
Could you talk about, because you said something yesterday that I really love, that if you paint landscape like you do, sometimes you get tired of green. And then what happens when you paint clouds?
so there's two things that are great, that are really freeing about cloud painting. So when you paint a lot of landscape, you have to paint a lot of green. And I don't know, that just, I mean, actually all my California paintings are really focused on times of day when the green is transformed into something else, right? So this one wouldn't be that, but
Okay, sorry.
like those early shows were like all really extreme light situations where the light is maybe turning the mountain pink or orange instead of green. And so I got really drawn into those kind of ethereal things. And then when you start painting the sky, you get to work in this different palette, because like the landscape, it's green and it's really like orange yellow based. so then you start to get to work in these grays and pinks and all these like really delicate colors. And I really like that palette. I really like that kind of softness. And, you know, there's like a lot of value. There's contrast, but there's a lot of really close value relation. You know, value is the painting term for light and dark, how light or dark, like on a grayscale things are. So you really find these like very subtle value relationships. But then the other thing that that it took me a while to figure out, I didn't just like painting the clouds. What I think in the end I might like more is how the clouds and the light, the shifting of light and dark in the sky that doesn't happen on a clear day, how that actually changes the land. So then you get all these layers of space because you get these dark and light layers. And if you show, yeah, there's that one, or that first one you showed, the big one, I think really shows it.
This one?
No,
Sorry.
but that first, I can, yeah, one of those. So you can see there's like the shadow and then the sun, and it just kind of, the light moves across the land, and that gives you kind of a way to experience the space that I think is different. And so, you know, I just find that flux becomes just a really energizing thing for my work. And then you just want that. So, and then like when I stopped doing the cloud series, my next thing was I went to the ocean, because like the ocean kind of provides that, like, because then we went into a drought. And so for like 5 years, there were no clouds because it didn't rain at all. So that period I painted at the ocean a lot, and the ocean kind of became the thing that created flux, because I don't find the ocean, I mean, I love painting at the ocean, but I do find the sky is like really maybe my favorite thing.
Yesterday you also told me something that I loved hearing, that for some time you were trying to meditate, or you were meditating, and then you met someone who was bird watching, and you were kind of impressed by bird watching, and then you noticed that painting
Yeah.
was.
So, I mean, we were talking about something and you said, "Oh, that sounds like really meditative." And I said,
Looking at clouds, I guess we were talking about.
"Well, yeah." And I said, "Yeah, you know, it really is." And that there was a long time, like I was really interested in meditation, but I wasn't really ever very good at it. I mean, right. It's never like worked that well for me. And I kind of eventually figured out that painting was as good as it was going to get for me. And I think the reason is, for some reason, there's like a purpose in the making of a painting. And that's a purpose that, for whatever reason, I'm like very aligned with. Whereas like you know, I mean, that meditation is like more abstract, right? It's more about a state of being, even though I really am into states of being, but it doesn't, I'm not able to hitch my wagon to that purpose. And so what I was saying is that the purpose of making the painting allows me to look at a level that I would never have the attention span or the time to look on my own. So in the landscape, and for me, the landscape is the thing that's done that more than, say, like a still life or the figure. Like still life, I love great still life painting, but I'm not a very good still life painter, because I just can't spend that much. I just don't see as much there, you know?
Right.
Where in the landscape, I just feel like I can always see more and go more deeply. And there's just, you know, once I find something that I want to paint, there's just like an endless draw there. And it's that like really deep looking that is what creates the sort of meditative consciousness changing experience for me, that I find so, you know, that has essentially become like what painting means to me. Like I've kind of tried to let go of all the other stuff, and that's really just that experience is what I am trying to get. But so I used to paint, when I was painting at the ocean, I painted in this park right north of San Francisco called the Marin Headlands. And I was out there one day, like scouting out a painting spot, and I was hiking around, and I ran into this guy I knew who was bird watching. And Of course, my dog just came in and opened the door. So
you can bring him in. He's welcome.
he's in. It's just now I can hear all the noise out there. So
Is it Oscar or Leo?
It's Oscar. He's
Hi,
bird.
Oscar.
He's bird watching, and of course, I'm just like, why would you like, what are you doing on a Tuesday morning out,
Trying to spot
bird
cardinals.
watching? Like, what a ridiculous thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally judged him for that, and like, what a waste of time it was. And then I don't remember how much later it was, I essentially realized that bird watching and painting landscape were the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that, the purpose of thing of bird watching is to see the bird, and it takes you in nature, and it takes you to do things that I'm gonna read this quote because it's
read the quote,
because it's about purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's a quote about Constable's painting, mm-hmm. and it says, for Constable, perception is active, perception is purposive, driven by internalized imperatives which are as much emotional as intellectual. I always loved that, these internalized imperatives that were your purpose, that the act of viewing, watching and looking can offer you. So
I think it's Constable who says that painting and feeling are just two forms of the same thing, and that's also a beautiful idea. And as you were describing or comparing, in a way, painting and bird watching, I love the fact that it's basically about choosing to pay attention to something that is always there and that we are not always paying attention to. But if you decide to, let's say in your case, or for today's purpose, paint clouds, it just means you're going to pay extra attention and dedicate part of your day or multiple days or months of your life looking at this thing that is actually always there. And I really like what you said about repetition, how yesterday you also quoted Stanley, what's his name? Stanley
Lewis.
And his quote is, keep working and something will happen.
Something will happen. Yeah, I mean, in Stanley Lewis's case, that's like the same painting. Like if you ever see his paintings, they're like concrete. There's just so many layers. In my case, I think I brought that up in sort of like the series of just addressing
revisiting a
topics.
Place.
And I mean, the thing with landscape painting, if you become, I mean, like an endless merry-go-round that I get on is like, do I need to change, or do I just keep doing what I'm doing more? And mm-hmm. I have yet to choose change. Mm-hmm. I've never chosen change. I mean, I guess I've changed in some ways, but the landscape is sort of it's an infinite subject, and it's infinitely complex and deep. And what we perceive of it in any moment is infinitesimally small. It's tiny, mm-hmm. right? And so the thing that's cool about it, as you spend a lot of time on a subject like that, it just has this unlimited depth, and you can keep seeing deeper and deeper into it. But then also you find, you also find your way to yourself that way, mm-hmm. in that over time, elements of the landscape or of light or whatever become really vital to you. I mean, just like the color of like the sun going down on a cloudy sky, and you get these golds and these pinks. I mean, these are, I don't know, like these are like some of the most important things in my life. Mm-hmm. And, it's just a phenomena that's happening outside of us. But I was looking at this incredible book that Salinger O'Reilly published, I don't know, in the early 2000s.
Constable Skies.
Constable Skies. So it was a show they had of his little sky sketches, and it's just these little oil on paper paintings that he did. Oh. And one of the like snippets of the essays I saw was him making permanent the ethereal. Mm-hmm. And somehow that becomes just a really important idea and undertaking. And it's like, if there's a gorgeous cloud day happening and I'm not
Painting.
in it, it's almost painful. It's almost
It's
physically
disturbing.
painful, because you just realize, like, I think also, as I've gotten a little older, and you get to middle age, and like, your life isn't infinitely in front of you, and it's like there's just this sense of the passage of time, right? And when I'm not painting a great cloud day, it's like, how many more of those are there going to be
Oh
left,
my God,
right?
yeah,
I mean, not really, I don't
cry.
get that
No.
morbid, but you just, like, it's just this lost thing. It's like, this is my purpose, is
You want to enjoy it.
I'm
You
supposed to
want
make
to
this real.
eat it up.
But actually, that passage of time element is something that I really wanted to talk about. And
because you compared it to hyper realistic, or a painting that comes from a photograph, and I also love that idea.
yeah, so I mean, people always ask me, do you work from photographs in the studio? And the answer is no. I mean, I have done that. I occasionally, I mean, since I now paint with my iPhone in my pocket at all times, now I'll take pictures of stuff just to kind of see what I'm looking at. But I've never really been interested in photorealism. I mean, I kind of tried it, I guess, a little bit, but and I think ultimately what I realized that I think is so important about perceptual painting from observation is that there's, like, the experience of time, and the passage of time somehow gets in the painting, because whether it's a there's sort of two ways. Like, there's like the flux of a fog rolling over a mountain, or the sky moving across, the clouds moving across the sky, and these are physically moving objects that you're kind of in some way pinning down. And what you don't want to do is, you don't really want to freeze them. You somehow want the painting to feel like the clouds are moving across the sky, right? And when I paint the landscape on multi-session paintings, what you get is, you get this kind of, it's almost like a quilt, like a patchwork quilt, right? Where there's these moments that have happened, they could be over a period of months, that are all different moments. Some might be at 6:42 in the morning, and the other is at like 10:30, and one's in September and one's in April. And you're kind of like, you sort of use all these tricks and falsehoods to try to weave together this whole thing that feels whole. And some people want to do that more than others. Like, I just have to make it feel like it's really got continuity. I mean, there are other painters that are attracted to the sort of, like, less smooth quality of that.
Right.
But in either one, you have this sense of time in the painting. And I think great paintings have that, and it's not just great landscapes. I think all great painting have it, but, like, photorealism doesn't have it, because it's a frozen moment, and there's a level of continuity that's way more than a perceptual painting can have. I mean, perceptual painting is sort of like a Super 8 movie or something like that, right? And photorealism's like digital. It's like everything can have an element of perfection that you just don't get in perceptual painting, but I don't think you need it either.
I also like, when you were describing painting clouds, how monumental they are, even compared to a mountain.
Yeah, so we were just talking about, I think the colors, and just this sort of, why are they so, like, why do they draw you? And I can't remember what was the point that you said about them.
No, I was just saying that, like, every time you look at a cloud, they've changed, right?
Yeah.
And you were saying how, in a way, when you're painting landscape, more than just one moment, every time you look, you're kind of taking that fragment and bringing it to the painting. And
yeah, I mean, so in one sense, one of the things that are cool about clouds is they can be so vast, right? I mean, like, a thunderhead can be 10,000 feet high, right? I mean, it's like bigger than a mountain, but it's made of vapor. I mean, it's just like, and so when you're painting them and they're lit correctly, in certain ways where you can really see them, there's just this, like, vast, unimaginable spaces. And I think, as a human, to be contemplating, like, unimaginably large spaces is you know, those are the kind of experiences that I think really shrink the self, and sort of the barrier between the world and you vanishes. And I mean, I think that's what essentially landscape painting does for me, is you're kind of in this infinite, you're contemplating this vast infinite thing, and
Uh-huh.
you kind of vanish in the process, and you have these experiences where you sort of feel like the separation of self and the other, or the subject and the object, go collapse.
It's almost like a sensual relation, right? Because you're taking it in and then putting it back out. It's a
Yeah, and then you're
strange.
kind of making this version of it that is in some ways so pathetic when you're there.
No,
No,
no.
but like when you're there and you're like looking at your painting, and then you're looking at the, it's so, it's kind of sad. But then when you get the painting away and you kind of forget about it, then there's hopefully something beautiful. But the other thing that you kind of just referenced there, that we talked about yesterday, that I do think, I should have tacked this to the previous topic, but like when you are painting the sky, I can't actually paint clouds fast enough to get them correct. So one of the things we talked about is that Constable like actually had the facility to paint almost like scientific.
Oh yeah, that
They're
was
almost
super
like,
interesting.
they're like meteorological studies, right? Like
It's
he
like the
had,
Weather Channel, the painting water
yeah,
Weather Channel.
he was like the Weather Channel in some ways, and he, oh, here's the one that you posted, which is just so phenomenal, and a
Oh my
very,
God.
this is actually a very large, very complex one for him. Um, you know, so his cloud studies were sort of twofold. They were sort of a scientific exploration, and then they became reference for his large, you know, academy driven studio paintings. Um, but I don't have Constable's facility. So what happens for me most of the time is you just kind of wind up collecting like a fragment, right? You'll
Mm-hmm.
see something that's really striking, and then you'll kind of go for it. You'll try to
Mm-hmm.
grab it, and you'll maybe get a third of it or half of it, and then it moves on. And you get these moments of that happening in different places, and then you just have to like invent a solution of how they're all going to fit together. So the thing that,
You then have to tie them together in your
yeah,
painting.
it's like that patchwork quilt, right? Like, so the thing that cloud painting offers me more than my other body of work is it's more, it's like more of a dance between observation and invention. So there's definitely more invention because, um, well, first of all, the sky's more forgiving. In some ways, the shapes of clouds can be really forgiving because you can, but as you get, you know, if you do it a long time, you sort of develop the vocabulary, and every different kind of day and every different kind of sky has like the kind of clouds, the kind of light that are there. And
Right.
if you can kind of tap into that vocabulary, then um, you can invent something that feels plausible.
It's also an interpretation of that cloud in a way, right? You're kind of it's passing through you.
Yeah, it's definitely more that. And then, you know, then I'll get home at night and I'll keep the palette and the painting's wet, and I'll look and I'll be like that's totally not working. And I feel like, you know, if you've been out painting for 4 or 6 hours on a cloud painting, you really kind of, you get it, it sort of gets inside you, and then I can be in the studio and I can have it all there and all the colors are mixed and it's all wet, and I can keep that process going even when I'm away. Because what I find is as the cloud paintings go on, I'm almost not even looking at the sky anymore. You know, you're
Right.
just like painting the painting. And I do remember like a, a teacher, you know, talking about at the beginning, you're like outside the painting and you're painting like on the surface of the painting. And then as you go, as the work progresses, you sort of like get inside the painting. And
Right.
once you achieve that state of getting like really inside the painting,
Merging.
then it's like you can do things. I can do things from my imagination that aren't normally that accessible for me.
You spoke about a teacher, and I wanted to bring Ben Moss, your
Yeah,
teacher from. So you told me yesterday that you basically your family trained you to be an engineer and take over the family business, but then in the last year of college at Dartmouth, you
at the
took this
last
one lesson.
possible moment, I got off the train. So
Why?
when I was
What about
finishing,
Ben Moss touched you so much?
so when I was finishing engineering school, I wound up taking like the freshman intro to art beginning drawing class. And I had this teacher whose name was Ben Frank Moss. Ben just passed away last year, unfortunately. He was the chairman of the department at the time, and I didn't know who he was. And um, I, I just, I've been at the engineering school. I'm doing like it was really I wasn't very good at engineering, so my whole college experience was really warped by the fact that I was sort of studying something that I was terrible at, and gave up obviously a lot of opportunities to do other things. So I wound up taking this class, and you go in the studios, and they're these like gorgeous skylit white towering ceilings. And Ben walked in the first day, and he did not look like an artist to me. He was like, I thought he looked like a banker dressed to do yard work on the weekend. I mean, he had like just like his K-Swiss sneakers and his button down and his khakis, and he just sat down and spent like an hour and a half in a really quiet voice talking about his childhood and his first memories and his nanny and when he discovered art. I mean, it was like the most personal thing I'd ever heard a grown man ever talk about. And I'm coming over from the engineering school where
I
I
know
had
the contrast.
no relationships with any faculty, and certainly not in a way that was stimulating to
Inspiring.
me. And I just thought he was the most riveting, fascinating person. And I just had this incredible experience. I mean, he was also it was the most incredible stroke of good fortune for me because he was such a master teacher. I actually brought a painting.
Oh, look at all the paintings in the background.
So I was saying yesterday, like when I first met Ben, I didn't really like his painting. Actually,
Oh, I love this.
so this is one of his. He did a lot of. So he painted very much on the boundary of
Landscape
abstract
and
and
abstraction, right?
representation, and he painted a lot of things that had a very landscape element to them.
For sure.
But
You know, I saw beach for some reason. I even saw the sand in front in that
yeah,
picture.
so and we had a lot in common because his dad was a minister, and he was sort of raised to be a minister, and he was at the Princeton Theological Seminary, and he was like suicidal and quit and then became an artist. And so I'm in, and I actually, this is a great story I didn't tell you yesterday, but I go into his office, like I schedule an office hours appointment, and I go in to talk about what's happening. I'm just like there's something's happening for me. Like I don't know what it, like in a capacity that I couldn't do in the classroom. And I start talking about myself and my family and my dad and kind of all these expectations. And as I start to talk about my dad, I feel like I'm going to start crying. And I'm like, I cannot cry in front of a professor. So I just kind of like back off the subject and steered away. And then he starts talking about his dad, and he starts bawling.
Oh my
And
God.
so we're in there, and he's crying, and I'm just like what is happening? And so, Ben was like, he helped me decide to go to the Art Institute, and then helped me figure out going to CCAC, and was just like, wrote recs for me to go to grad school, and was a totally never ending source of support and inspiration for me. And, just,
That's amazing.
I really cherish him. And yeah, but
the importance of the people that show up in our way and take us in the right direction. It's amazing.
So,
do you want to talk about a little, because you spoke about going to Chicago, and then tell us a little bit about how was the experience of going back home and then returning to California?
So I graduated from engineering school on a Saturday, and on that Monday, I started full-time at Art Institute of Chicago. And I actually had a pretty good time there in the summer because it was just summer school. And then in the fall, I went full-time, and pretty quickly I was not that into it. I just felt like, I mean, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and then I was living in New Hampshire, and I was just so out of it in terms of like what students were up to. And also, then you're like 24, and I don't know, everyone just felt young. And even though 24 sounds pretty young now,
I know.
I felt so old. And also, like, my family's business was based in Chicago, and so it just felt really, it felt
be easier for them to force you to stay.
it just was, it felt, I wouldn't say it felt oppressive. It just, I felt like I needed a little more space. So your husband had moved to Chicago, to San Francisco, and I had spent some time out in California when I was young and really liked it. And so I decided to go to CCAC, and I moved out to San Francisco and moved in with Tom. And I actually, Tom, we went to engineering school originally together, and then he worked in energy and did some finance stuff. And I remember like when he took his first UC Berkeley extension class of filmmaking, and the very first thing he shot literally was like a pot of boiling water. It was this like very Zen, minimalist, quiet moments thing, which was really funny. And, we were all like super supportive, and it was great. And it was just so cool that he became an artist and became a great artist. And we're so proud of him.
Engineers who become, one films the water boiling, the other one paints clouds. It's like,
yeah, I mean, it's not like my paintings were any more interesting than water boiling at the time, but I don't know, it was just cool. I mean, I think we were very close at that time, and I think one reason was we were at slightly different places, but we were both kind of on this journey towards art and trying to figure out what that meant for us and what our art forms would be. And, but.
So then, because now when I look at your work, there's a lot of California paintings. You live right by Mount Tam, which is in itself, as you said, almost like an ecosystem of its own. But you've also painted Ireland a bunch, and Italy. And how is it to, like, when you go to a different landscape, what happens inside you?
Well, I think the first thing is when you go on a painting trip, or as Corot and all the 19th century guys, a campaign as they called them. There's just that sense of urgency that I referenced earlier just really comes back, right? So
like,
when you got I don't know how many weeks you got, but you don't have a lot of time. And so when, especially in California, because it's nice all the time or most of the time, like there can be a total lack of urgency about getting out and making paintings. And so I think the first thing that a painting trip offers is that. I haven't been to Italy to paint since 2006, but I've been to Ireland maybe 3 times since then. And, Ireland is kind of like the winter cloud thing that I liked here, just every day, all the time. In addition to being, so my dad's brother's wife, so my aunt is from County Kerry, Ireland, and they have a house there. And so I've been lucky enough to go stay there and paint in County Kerry. And County Kerry is the southern westmost county. It's right in the ocean, and their house is really close to the sea. And it's just this incredible. Well, you've been there, it's this incredibly rustic, just, I don't know, there's just a soulfulness to the landscape there that's hard to explain. And then there's a drama that happens with the weather and the changing weather. So, I went twice this year, and it was cool because in the summer, I hadn't gone on a painting trip in a really long time. It was like, I surprised myself with how many paintings I could make in that, in a compressed amount of time. Because it's just, like it's so satisfying. I mean, the hardest thing about being a landscape painter for me is the looking for a motif, right? Looking for a subject is awful. And what I really like is once you find whatever that preliminary subject is and you get into it, then you like kind of look at, you're halfway through the painting and you look over your shoulder and you're like, oh, that's what I should have painted, but I didn't. So that's like your next painting. And then, once you get a little bit of momentum, then they sort of organically follow that way as you sort of settle in. But I mean, the worst part is like driving around looking for places to paint and looking for motifs. And I actually got in a car accident in Ireland this year doing it.
Oh my God.
Which was awful. I had never really been in a car accident. So that is just generally a danger of landscape painting, is you do spend a lot of time gazing out at the landscape behind the wheel, and it's a little bit of a problem. But yeah, I really like the trips, especially just like with how, you know, I have 3 kids, and, you know, home's just really busy. And sometimes cloud painting doesn't feel like the most urgent undertaking in life when you've got
so much going on.
young people around that have needs and things going on. So I think going away on those little trips, you know, longer or shorter, is amazing, because it just gives you, you know, great period of focus. But
I wanted to go back a little bit and talk about maybe my favorite topic in art, and clearly yours too, but repetition. So I like to think of repetition as a way of making things different, because I think exactly because of the reasons you were describing. Like, if you look at the same mountain every day, you will start seeing so many little things shifting because you see it every day, right? So it's almost as if repetition invites comparison in a way, or attention to detail.
well, like unchanged repetition leads to boredom, right? And boredom is actually a really productive experience. And I mean, a lot of creativity comes out of boredom. So, you know, when you were talking about Ben Moss in our conversation yesterday, we talked about how his teaching method was all about repetition. And so if it was an in-class assignment, you know, like the last thing he would ever encourage you is to spend a 2-hour class making one drawing. Like, he wouldn't probably let that happen. Right. And so what he knew was that whether it's a homework assignment or you're in class working on a theme, and he always had you work on these very specific themes, those first few drawings are your personal, are your obvious, that's like the obvious response, right? We all start with like the obvious thing.
Right.
And then, you know, if you don't care, you don't move past the obvious. But if you care, that repetition helps you move beyond the obvious. And that can come in different ways. That can come from something that's coming from inside that you didn't know, or it can be like you were talking about, looking at Mount Tam, like seeing things that you didn't see before. But I really like that kind of series way of working, and I do it I don't do it formally, but I do it, you know, and then like everything has its kind of, it's like a
bell curve.
Right. And then there's the denouement, not a bell curve. It's sort of like when they diagram literature, right? It's like the introduction, and then you know, there are these events, and then you have the climax of the story, and then you have like the denouement. I remember when I sort of hit the denouement of my first wave of cloud painting, you know, it was this like, it was actually the most energized. I actually felt like a vector. I personally felt like a vector. I was on this like trajectory. It was like being launched out of a cannon for me, where I was just totally committed and engaged in, and this was when I had 0 kids and 1 kid. So I was totally engaged in trying to master this thing. And then I kind of finally hit the plateau of it a little bit, and that came to an end. And then I left cloud painting behind. And then over time, you know, and that body of work was around when my son was born, and he's almost 15. So that started that long ago. And now I just kind of feel like the cloud paintings are just like, they will always just be something that rides alongside my other work. That I just think I'll always want to paint them and keep pursuing them. And even though that initial, you know, it was sort of like that initial enthusiasm was so intense. And I'm actually not sure I'll make a cloud painting better than the best ones of that period. I mean, that's the other thing that's challenging, is there's a period in your life as an artist where you just feel like all your best work is ahead of you.
Right.
And then you, at different times in your life, make some standout objects that you're like, I may never be able to make a painting that good again.
But
I mean,
there's something also, don't you think that sometimes when you look back at something that you thought was bad can change? So maybe
well,
something that,
both of them can change, right? The thing that you thought was so amazing years later can be like,
what was
and
I thinking?
what was I thinking? And then so often things that you discarded, once you get away from all the attachment and the emotions that you have around, you know, making things and all those kind of ambitions, and then you just sort of take it for what it is. It can be, you know, there can be stuff you love there.
Yeah.
But
I love this idea, and I don't know exactly why it made me think of it, but this idea that in life there's no rehearsal. It's Milan Kundera who said that. But you know, you do what you can do at that moment, and by the time you're ready to move on, you're not at that moment anymore. So
yeah, but it's interesting. Like when you say like you do what you can do, I was just thinking about, um, so like when I go to make a painting, and I haven't heard other people talk about this much, but this is a like really important and fundamental thing for me. I think of, I kind of in my mind label normal consciousness as like, that's like my executive consciousness,
mm-hmm.
where you're just like getting shit done in life, and you're just,
Right.
that's just like the normal plane we live on. I'm just like doing shit. And in that normal consciousness is all your ambition and all your insecurities about your value and your worth and yourself and your abilities and all that stuff. And along with it, you know, are the things like you love and you are inspired by. But it's like, so when I go out and I see like a great like motif or a cloudy thing, like I feel like all that comes like sort of rushing up, right? Like all my ambition, you know, I'm inspired, but I also have like all the things I'm going to prove to myself and everyone else about how great I am. And
it is a practice in a way, right?
right. And it's like all that comes with it. And so I'll start the painting and I'm all excited and this is great. And it's usually like about 45 minutes or an hour into the painting. And I've worked in the, you know, cause like at the beginning, it's like, oh gosh, okay. But it's so cursory that you don't really judge. And then you get in there where you've done enough that there's something to really see. And I'll invariably have this just complete emotional collapse where you realize that the dream you had, the fantasy you had, it's actually a fantasy,
doesn't match reality.
Is not going to match reality. And so like when I was young and I was first painting landscape, that was like almost debilitating. Mm-hmm. Like sometimes I would just be defeated by that experience.
Frustrated, yeah.
And then through cloud painting, I just met it in that repetition, that series. I met that thing so many times that now it's like I literally exhale, take a sip of water, and just keep going. But the thing is it's actually at that moment that the real painting begins, because it's at that time when you sort of let go of all that and you're sort of defeated and all your kind of silly plans are folly essentially. Uh-huh. And you just kind of let go of them, and then you kind of are who you are as you are, as Milan Kundera would say, like you're just going to have to be yourself. And then just being yourself allows like a presence to the landscape that I feel like I don't possess beforehand. So really, to make a good painting, you have to go through that. Like that little abyss. And then you know, then something hopefully happens that's great. But so and it's then that your consciousness kind of changes. And I think that all the things about painting and art that feed me and feed people start to happen, because the other part is sort of like all your shoulds and your worries.
You kind of let go of that part, that kind of
and that like that executive mind just falls away, and you have this really nourishing experience. And so
yes, I could spend an entire day looking at clouds and talking about painting with you. It's been a pleasure. We have 6 more minutes, and I wanted to first say that there's someone from Italy that said che bella chiacchierata, and then she spoke Portuguese to me, so thank you.
Oh wow.
Gisela, her name Gisela.
That means what a beautiful chit chat.
Grazie
mille. A little chit chat.
And then I also wanted to take this live one step further. So go beyond our executive function. And would you play the guitar for us?
Yeah, I will. So I'm going to do that. I'm actually prepared to do that. So
Tom, my husband, said he would like to suggest that there have been other car accidents.
those were while he was driving.
Okay, your fault, Ronnie. Tom, why don't you come over? Come watch Yaz with me. I'm waiting for you here in my bedroom.
I don't think Tom's heard this one. One of the things that Giselle and I talked about yesterday that we didn't get to today was that when I was 12, I started playing guitar, and in high school, I really wanted to be a musician. I loved music, and I played the saxophone, and I took guitar lessons, but I always sucked. And then all my friends were in a band, and I kind of couldn't really be in the band. And then they let me play saxophone in it, like my senior year in high school a little bit. And so one of the things I was saying yesterday is like, in music, I never had the ability to like play, and I don't mean play the instrument, I mean play like a child plays, right? And that when I found drawing and then painting, that was when I found, oh, my wife's come in to adjust our screen so that you can't well, the way this is saying, it's really hard to see the guitar.
I want Kate to join us too. Kate, can you be on camera?
Oh, we got a dog here. Here we go. We'll get the dog in.
I want dogs. I want Kate. I want the kids. Hello, Kate. I invited Tom, but he didn't come. So okay.
But when I started playing, when I started drawing, that was like I was able to play, and that's when I kind of knew like this was the medium for me. But at my wife's urging, and which I think she regrets, I then took the guitar up again, and I've played a lot lately. But I'm obviously not as good a guitar player as a painter. Hi. All right. So
session.
Couples live. Okay, we have only 3 minutes.
We normally do this with a glass of wine. This is a song by Nick Lowe that I probably listened to and played 50 times before I realized the quarantine significance of it.
Okay.
It's called I Read a Lot. I read a lot nowadays, much more than before you left me high and dry in a loveless land with nothing but time on my hands. I read a lot, not just magazines, but other more serious things to get me through the day, nighttime too, whilst wondering how in the world to go on without you. Lonely isn't the word for me now. Blue doesn't describe it somehow. I think there's a horn arrangement during this part, which I'm going to skip. Blue's not the word for me now. I read a lot, I can't put it down, while others are painting the town. You find me in a world of fantasy, population 1, that's me. So if you ask me how I stop contemplating what I now have not, I'll reply, I read a lot.
Woo! Thank you so much.
That's what I've done during quarantine. What?
That was lovely. Thank you to
Thank you.
everyone who watched. We have 19 seconds before Instagram kills us all. So,
All right.
bye.
Beijos.
It was amazing.
Thank you so much. I really loved it.
Let's do it again tonight with wine.
Okay.
Bye.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Bye.